Well, we certainly have an interesting, I was almost said debate. Well, we'll see how it turns out. Interview for you guys is Rob Pincus. He's developed a combat-focused shooting program. He's also appeared on shows such as Personal Defense TV, Best Defense, Stop the Threat, Best Defense, Survival, Weaponology, and Trigger Time. So you get a sense of where Rob is coming from. Rob, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, man, appreciate you having me.
Yeah. And so I have a lot of guests that I agree with. I have guests that we just learned from. And here we might have some, no, I'm positive we'll have some disagreement. But let's see if we can find agreement too, okay?
I think we will.
All right. So, Rob, first off, we did a story on you, and I want to give you a chance to clarify a little bit. It was about having guns in kids' rooms, right? So, first, what's your view on that?
Well, the thing with guns and kids, it's an issue of responsibility, it's an issue of safety, right? Obviously, we need to educate people, including our own families, if we're going to be gun owners, and that's why I appreciate you having me on today, because I know that you have a lot of gun owners in your audience, probably a lot of people that aren't gun owners, people are curious about it, and the piece that you did talked about something that's even somewhat controversial, or at least an issue of conversation inside of the gun industry and the gun community, which is, if you own a gun, and you have kids in the house, how do you kind of keep them separated or keep them appropriately interacting and make sure you don't have the accidents, the negligence, kids are curious, that kind of thing. So the way you store a firearm, and you know, here in California there's laws, there's other states that have some laws, some states it's kind of a free-for-all, but you have to be a responsible gun owner. Having a gun in a kid's room, now I grew up with guns in my room. I was a kid that shot, I had my own guns, I had access to firearms, and I had a responsibility instilled in me from a young age about how to deal with them, how to interact with them. The issue that really comes up is the issue of home defense, the issue of personal defense. People that own guns primarily for defense, which is the majority of gun owners in America, they're interested in, you have kids, we're interested in protecting our family, interested in protecting our home. Once you cross the line and you say, okay, I'm gonna have a gun in the house, I'm gonna learn how to use it, you start thinking about how am I gonna stage it, where am I gonna stage it? Well, if I'm in the living room, if I'm out in the kitchen getting a glass of water, dogs start barking, glass breaks, the alarm goes off, people are screaming. If there's a potential intruder in my house or someone trying to get in my house, where's the first place I'm likely to go? Where's the first place you're likely to go? Probably to check on the kids, protect the kids. But once I'm there, if there's a safe in that room, and inside of that safe there's a secured firearm that I'm trained to use, my wife's trained to use, that I can use to defend myself in a worst case scenario, why not leave us there? Lock the kid's door, maybe put a reinforced door in that kid's room if you're really into security, if that's your thing. Lock the door, get on the phone, call the police, and stay there. But you've got access to a firearm that's in a safe that you're trained to use, and you don't have to run around the house with a gun. You don't have to run around the house with the kids if there's a potential intruder. And that's the theory behind staging a gun in a kid's room inside of a safe.
But always inside of a safe.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that was the misunderstanding in the piece you did back in the spring, was this idea that, you know, just hide it under a towel. And I think the misunderstanding was, what I said was, you know, hang a towel, hang the clothes, put it in the back of the kid's closet, mount it to the wall, the safe. And inside of that safe, you've got the gun.
So let me give you some data and then my own anecdotal experience, and curious what you think about it. So it turns out approximately 1 in 3 handguns are kept locked and loaded in a house. 73% of children under the age of 10 know where their parents keep their firearms, and 36% admitted handling the weapons. So there's two, you know what, I'll save the anecdotal part in a second. So those are facts, which, Rob, I take your word. We had a discussion off the air too, that you're super safe. That's your job, right? Is to teach people how to be safe with weapons. But you can see that others are not going to be as safe. So does that not concern you, that leads to a much higher chance of a kid getting a gun? And I can get into the numbers of how many kill themselves, kill their parents, et cetera, as well. That's a much bigger problem than a possible intruder in your house?
I think that gun safety is a huge problem. I think that gun responsibility is a huge issue, right? Education is the key there. The numbers, and I'm not sure what the source is, and I trust those numbers. Numbers seem reasonable to me. My question would be, the 36% of the kids that said, yes, I've handled my parents' gun, was the insinuation that they had snuck in and grabbed the gun and played with the gun when the parents didn't know? Or was that 36% of them saying, oh yeah, my parents have taken me to the gun range and they've taught me how to interact with the gun safely? You know, those guns that are locked up and loaded, I don't know what percentage of the guns are locked up but not loaded. I don't know what percentage of the guns are not locked up but disassembled and there's no ammunition in the house. You know, I know that there are gun owners who do not store their guns responsibly. I wish they would. And that's part of my messaging inside of the gun community. But the messaging outside of the gun community is, hey, a lot of us are very responsible. 300 million plus guns in the country, right? We can go into the thing where cars result in death, knives result in death, and all kinds of things around the country that are stored every day in the house, poisons, right? Chemicals that are in the house for cleaning. Kids drink the poison because the parents don't secure them properly. These are all tragedies. These are all bad. We can't make cleaning chemicals go away. We can't make cars go away. Can't make knives go away. Can't make guns go away. They're here. 80 million gun owners in the U.S. Education is the key. Responsible gun ownership is the issue that we're trying to educate on.
So let me do anecdote because I promised, and then I'll come back to facts. Okay. I've got kids, and no matter what, and they're young, they're 3, they're 6, and no matter what code I put on the iPad, they figure it out.
Right.
So if they can figure out what code I use for the iPad, maybe they could figure out what code I use for the safety deposit box or whatever it is that I've got, the safe that I've got the gun in.
Absolutely. And I always say, I say this, and I think you even ran a video clip of me speaking a couple of years ago at the NRA convention in your piece in May. If your issue is your kids are going to break into the safe, it doesn't matter if that safe is in your bedroom, in the basement, in the closet, or in their room, right? I would say that's a parenting issue, right? If you're worried about your kids sneaking into that safe, breaking into the code, stealing your key, getting the combination, whatever that is, that's a parenting issue. And I have a 21-year-old who's pregnant with my first grandchild, and I've got a 14-month-old. And I've had stepkids along the way at various ages in between. So I've got a lot of experience with what we're talking about. We know the kids are going to sneak in. They're going to know where your guns are. They're going to know where your credit cards are. They're going to know where the other things you may not want them to find in your bedroom. They're going to be sneaky. So your responsibility really becomes education, right? And I don't know if you have guns in the house. Obviously, I have guns in the house and I have kids in the house. So education and open dialogue and proper access, supervised access. One of the first things I did, my now wife, when we first started dating, first started spending time together, there were going to be guns around. There were going to be guns secured. But the education for her kids, right, my stepkids now, 10 and 12 at the time, 7 and 9, educating them about guns was one of the first things that I talked to her about and that we talked to them about, because what 9-year-old kid isn't curious about guns? He's playing the first-person shooter games, he's watching the movies, he's curious about them.
Yep.
So let's get an education, let's get a dialogue going, because that then makes it much less likely that there's going to be this, we go to run an errand and he's 12 years old and he's going to sneak into the bedroom, sneak into the closet and try to break the code.
So, Rob, given that there are 300 million guns in the country, I'm glad there's guys like you around to teach more safety because that's imperative. But I look at the stats overall, and so I don't look at it as to what would I do, what would my kids do, because everybody thinks they're going to be safe. Everybody thinks they're going to parent. Great. And I tell my kids about the street all the time, like, don't go in the street, whatever you do, don't go in the street, because yes, cars are super dangerous, right? And so we can't get rid of cars, but I can teach them not to go in the street. Okay, I hear you on all that, and obviously you're going to be as safe as possible because that's your job. But when you look at the numbers, you've got 699 kids under the age of 11 who were killed or injured by a gun in 2015. You've got 2,700 kids between the ages of 12 and 17 who were killed. This is all in 1 year, in 2015. Okay, so it's hard to know because it's a big country, so you need context for that. So now this is overall, not just for kids. Ratio in 2012, according to the Violence Policy Center. It's one justifiable killing for every 32 murders, suicides, or accidental deaths. So when you just bring it down to accidental deaths, the most positive spin I could put on it, still twice as many accidental deaths as there are justifiable homicides, meaning people who are actually defending themselves and kill someone. So when I look at those numbers, I think, if I've got a gun in the house, it is far more likely to cause our death than to protect us from that death.
I understand the way the numbers play out. My question with those numbers always is, well, where do law enforcement use of firearms fall into those numbers, right? Are we putting those into the homicides? Are we putting those into the justifiable homicides? And
they're in a separate category.
They're in a separate category. Yeah. So where are the accidents involving the quote unquote, it was an accident, but maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe it was a kid purposefully doing something. Maybe it was a suicide. Maybe it wasn't an accident. It's hard to get into the numbers and really know exactly what happened. Do accidents happen? Absolutely. Do suicides happen? Absolutely. Do murders happen? Absolutely. Could they happen with the gun that you own? Yes, if you don't become a responsible gun owner. that's where it has to keep coming back to me. It's about the education. We talk about accidents with kids. One of the things that I've talked about for a long time is the educational community, right? Inside of the public education community in our country, guns are verboten, right? Kids can't talk about guns. You hear the crazy stories about kids making finger guns and getting suspended, or chewing a Pop-Tart into a gun shape, whatever it is. The problem is, what do we do with things that are dangerous with our kids in schools? What do we talk? We educate them about fire. We educate them about drug abuse. We educate them about vehicles. We educate them about pollution, all the things that are dangerous. We get sex education, because unprotected sex can be dangerous. What do we do about guns? Let's not talk about them. I really feel like we could cut those numbers down. I don't know how far, but we can make a dent. Maybe we can cut them in half. Maybe we can get rid of most of those accidents, if not all of them, if we educate kids about guns, because guns can be dangerous.
Yeah. Well, look, you're not going to get disagreement out of me on that, because, I make the same argument about sex ed. So just because you don't teach it doesn't mean the kids aren't going to have sex.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm always for education. And so I hope through education we can bring some of those death rates down. But by the way, to answer your specific questions that you asked there, and they're good, fair questions, it's broken down this way. In 2013, 505 deaths according to accident or negligent discharge of a firearm. 281 deaths they couldn't tell. They didn't classify as a homicide or an accident. And then in terms of justifiable gun-related homicides in 2012, granted it's a different year, but just by one, gives you a rough sense, 259 justifiable gun-related homicides. So 259 to 505 plus this 281, you can't quite tell, et cetera. Now, again, when you include the murders and suicides, well, that's a much, much bigger number. So let's go to that for a second. Let's start.
Can I real quick, one more thing I want to throw out there?
Yeah.
There's also going to be another number in there that isn't represented, and it's the number of people that use firearms to defend themselves without a shot being fired. It's the number of people who, because they have firearms in their house, because they've thought about home defense, have better locks, that don't get a home invasion. It's the idea that there are people who are just going to say, hey, buddy, you picked the wrong guy. I'm carrying a gun. I'll defend myself. I'll defend my family. You need to go around the corner. And that never gets reported, never gets talked about. So this idea that only the times people shoot a bad guy and he ends up in the morgue, we're only going to give credit for that, I think that's a little bit unfair on the numbers.
No, that's a totally fair point. And I'm sure that there are a great number of cases where people, brandish a weapon in a positive sense, right? And of course, then there are the people who brandish a weapon and not in a positive sense, and then it leads to more violence. So to answer another question you posed, officer-involved incident shootings, this is not, there's two different categories. One where the officers do the shooting. This is the category where the officers get shot, is 319 people. So that's another thing that I'm worried about. Where,
Absolutely.
And I'm worried about it in both cases. I think the cops shoot quicker these days because they think everybody's got a gun. I got to be careful. And so I'm afraid it leads to more police shootings. I'm also afraid it leads to more cops getting shot.
I'll tell you that from the inside of the training industry, and I work with a lot of police officers. I'm a reserve police officer. I've been an active police officer in the past. I will tell you that I would submit to you that officers are less likely to pull the trigger more often than not across our country over the last decade, maybe 2 decades. There are new rules that are being put in place all the time that restrict the officer's likelihood to go to the gun when there are other options. There's education, there's the taser, the advent of the taser era in the last 20 years has changed a lot of gun use, changed a lot of the need for gun use, because it's an alternative force that can help you get a control of a situation that I didn't have when I was an active police officer, that absolutely would have been a handy tool and is very useful to a lot of people. The other thing you have is you've got laws inside of a lot of police departments now, or rules, administrative policies, where when I was a police officer, it would be not uncommon for us to escalate our presence, our force, just by being there, by drawing a gun. So maybe a guy has a knife, maybe a guy is being violent, maybe a guy is being uncooperative, you're not sure what's going on, and you think, this guy could be getting ready to hurt me or someone else here. You draw your gun and you say, no, really, you need to listen to me and stop. And they do. And the gun goes back in the holster and we get control of the situation, we move on. Nowadays, there are agencies where if you pull that gun out of your holster, it's considered a documentable use of force. It goes on your record. You got to write a report. You got to talk to the sergeant about it. It becomes much more cumbersome for that officer to take that very logical step, very rational step in many cases, to pull that gun out and get control of a situation so that it doesn't escalate to a use of violence. And now they're less likely to do that. So I think in the training, in the education, in good ways and in some potentially damaging ways, officers are less likely to use guns today. I understand what you're saying, but the evidence really looks at the other direction.
Well, so violent crime rates are down overall. Less cops are killed overall throughout the decades and throughout the years. This year will probably be an exception.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons the cops are using the guns at the rate that they are is because they're afraid everybody's armed. And there's a good reason to believe that. So, okay, I'm going to do a quick aside here. Philando Castile, gun owner, legal gun owner, and did you see what happened there?
Familiar with the case,
Yep.
yeah. Not at any great level of detail.
No, I know. Just
what everybody's
looking at
seeing.
it from the news, right? And he tells the officer, "I've got a legal weapon," and the officer panics and then shoots him. Okay, that's the way I saw it.
That's the way you see it.
Right. Because he told him, "Get your wallet, put your hands up," and the guy goes to get his wallet and he shoots him. Okay, but that's not for the purpose of this conversation. What I'm curious about is, why did the NRA support Philando Castile more? I mean, you would think like, hey, that's a legal gun owner. What are you doing? You can't just shoot legal gun owners like that just because they have a legal gun on them.
I think we're going to learn more about that case as time goes on. I think we're going to get some more evidence as to what the officer's normal procedures were and whether or not he sort of violated his normal procedures in that moment and panicked, or if what he did was congruent with his training and with his prior operations on all his other traffic stops. There's no doubt that is a bad situation. I think we do have to let it play out. I think there's some issues about, for example, does that officer have a history of drawing his gun to a ready position when he does a traffic stop like the one he was on? Or does he never draw his gun and he went right to the gun and when he felt threatened and shot the suspect? Or did he draw his gun when the subject said, "I have a gun"? And that made the officer nervous. As I think those are three very different circumstances that all could lead to that shooting. And some are better than others in terms of legal gun ownership. Some are better than others in terms of the training that officer had. And some are better than others in terms of his attitude and what led to the shooting and how justified that shooting actually was. But here's the issue. And I can't speak for the NRA. I can't tell you why the NRA, I don't represent the NRA. But what I can tell you is that there are a lot of legal gun owners who are very much on the fence of this. And I count myself among them, that until we really know more than we know now, it's very hard to judge whether that officer made a mistake, whether the deceased made a mistake, or whether they both made a mistake. It wasn't an accident, right? The officer pulled the trigger. Did he pull the trigger because he felt threatened? Did he pull the trigger because he misunderstood an action? Did he pull the trigger because he gave an instruction that actually was congruent with the same exact actions that person might make if they were reaching for the guns? So if you tell somebody, "Hey, show me your wallet," and you know they have a gun in their waistband, and they reach for their wallet, which is in their back pocket, that's the same exact motion. So we have to be really careful about how, from the law enforcement side, we articulate instructions to people. And if they follow the instructions in a way, the furtive movement is the phrase that's always used in law enforcement training. If the movement looks threatening, and the officer can't distinguish between a threatening movement and an innocent movement. The Diallo shooting back in the 90s in New York is a perfect example, where he turns around suddenly, reaches for his wallet, puts it out in front of him, and the officer believed he was being shot at. And then his other officers that were with him believed that there was an exchange of fire because of the reflections in the glass and everything else. There can be a misunderstanding in these moments, and they're tragedies. What we need to do is really know the details and learn from them. And that's whether it's a kid with an accident or a police officer that shoots someone who's legally armed.
Right. So, look, there's two different angles to the Philando Castile shooting. One is I see conservatives defending the Bundy Ranch guys all the time when they on tape threaten police officers' lives. I don't understand their defense of that at all.
You and I agree 100% on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I don't see them jumping to Philando Castile's defense, which I would have thought, even if they didn't mean it for the NRA, and I know you don't speak for the NRA, that it would have been a savvy move to say, "Oh, that's a legal gun owner, hey, cops should be careful about that," et cetera. But the second part is, this is exactly why, Rob, I don't carry a gun, right? Because whether it's in an interaction with a police who might justifiably be nervous that you're going to pull the weapon instead of getting your wallet, or whatever it might be, whether it's justifiable or not, or the stats on accidents at home, on suicides, homicides, et cetera, it appears to be a verifiable fact that you are less safe if you have the gun on.
I think you're less safe if you have the gun on you, if you have the gun in your house, if you're not trained, if you're not responsible, if you aren't careful, if you aren't thinking about what you're doing. And that's the problem. The problem isn't the gun. I refuse to jump to the side of, yeah, you're right, the stats say you're more likely to get killed. What I would say is that you're more likely to get hurt, you're more likely to have someone you care about get hurt, you're more likely to have that accident, that negligence occur if you're not educated, if you're not responsible. And that to me is the mission. We educate, so you talk about what's the response after the Castile incident. The response for me was to get on as many media outlets as I could, inside of the gun community, out, morning talk radio shows, whatever, and talk about how to interact with the police when you're legally armed. And inside of the law enforcement training community, we're educating police officers more and more how to deal with legally armed people. Because if you look at the last 25 years, there's more gun ownership, there's dramatically more concealed carry permits, there's more people carrying guns in public. Certainly in different parts of the country, the numbers are higher than other parts, but even in California here, there are more and more people carrying guns all around this state, more and more people all over the country carrying guns. We have to be educated on both sides. And the old days when law enforcement would react to, oh, that's weird, you have a gun. Okay, let's secure the gun. Let's make sure the gun's unloaded. Let's make sure you put your hands in the air and all. Nowadays, you can't do that. You can't be down in Texas or Florida where there's a lot of concealed carry, Arizona. You can't be down there and think everybody who has a gun is somehow a threat. And law enforcement's getting more and more educated. Minnesota, there's a lot of concealed carry. There's a lot of gun positive, gun responsible education, positive gun activism in Minnesota, a lot of education. And if there was a misstep between that officer's training and his education, or a misstep with that legal gun owner's education and training, we need to figure out what that misstep was and educate so that it doesn't happen again next week, tomorrow, 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now.
What do you think about the guys that are walking into the Walmarts with the AR-15s?
They're an embarrassment.
Oh, okay.
They're an embarrassment to the community. I don't think you should be using a potentially lethal tool to make a political statement, right? If you want to educate people about guns, wear a T-shirt, hand out flyers. You want to educate police. The thing that was going on out in California years ago with the open carry, where the people would carry a unloaded gun, because it was legal to carry an unloaded gun, and walk around with their cell phones and wait for the police to get there, and then, well, it's my right, and this and that, and get into these debates. They're wasting police officers' time. They're embarrassing the gun community. It's a problem. And there are a lot of us inside of the gun community who have been very outspoken about the open carry activism. Now, should open carry of a gun be legal? Absolutely. Right? Should you be able to legally carry a gun? Absolutely. Here's the problem. Protesting, activism through antagonism, I don't think makes a lot of sense. I don't think you're going to be compelling. I don't think you're going to change people's minds. And I think, if anything, you're going to turn people off. So there are a lot of us in the gun community who don't agree with those activities and try to curtail them and educate against them whenever we can.
I'm curious what you think about some of the precautions. So there's the bullets that are armor piercing. There is, for the kids that we were talking about, there's child-proof safety locks, there's loading indicators. I know those are three separate issues, but what's your take on those?
Loaded chamber indicator, not a big deal. Lots of guns have them. In fact, I'm launching a new gun company this year. We announced it earlier this year, and we're going to have a loaded chamber indicator on the pistols that we're selling. Not a big deal. The child-proof safety lock, and this kind of goes back to what we talked about before. If there's such a thing as a child-proof safety lock, they wouldn't be able to get in your iPad either, right? So I don't know what that refers to. I think the issue with locks, the issue with locking and securing guns, is the difference between storage and staging when we talk about it in the training community. A gun that's stored, you got to go through several steps to kind of get it ready, get it loaded, maybe reassemble it, the ammo's over here, the gun's over here, all that. A gun that's staged for personal defense, and this is where you get into, well, how many times are you really going to need that? How likely are you to need that? Well, here's the thing. If I got 10 guns in my house and they're all disassembled and the ammo's in the basement, if I am that 1 in a million guy that has somebody, lose his mind and trying to come through my front door with an axe, how much of an idiot am I to have my guns disassembled and ammo in 3 separate rooms, right? So if I can responsibly put behind that child-proof safety lock, whatever it is, if I can put that gun in a condition where it's staged and I can get quick access, whether it's through a clandestine storage device that looks like a piece of furniture and it's actually a locked cabinet that holds a gun, or it's a safe that's obviously a gun safe, but it's got large buttons and a pattern, or it's got a biometric scanner, or I've got an RFID card that only opens it when me or someone else who's authorized and trained to use it accesses the gun. I need to have quick access if I have any hope of being able to use that gun to defend myself and my family. So that's where the locks issue comes in. And then you had one other thing you wanted to...
The armor-piercing bullets.
It's a little bit of a semantic issue, right? Because there's different levels of armor, obviously, right? So there's soft body armor that's only going to stop handguns. There's ceramic plates that are going to stop most rifles. But we could go right now. We go down in California. We go down and buy a hunting rifle that's going to pierce 99% of the ammo or the armor that law enforcement wears. Let's say we could if we hunted around, we could find some rifles and ammunition that's used for hunting, that's used for extreme long range precision, that'll put rounds right through some of the hard armor, some of the shields that you see like SWAT teams and things carrying around. So this idea that there's some nefarious magic bullet section in the gun shop where you go to buy the evil armor piercing bullets, it's really a misnomer. It's a misrepresentation of the facts. There are a lot of different levels of armor, and there's a lot of different levels of power and penetration ability that different handguns and rifles have.
Do you really think that they're buying those more powerful bullets, let's say, and I get the range that you're talking about, because they're going to shoot a deer from a long distance, or are some of them buying it because if they're in a shootout, they'd rather have the more powerful bullets?
There's no doubt, right? We both know that there's some guy who bought that rifle because he thinks, hey, if civilization falls apart and I have to defend my family and my water and my food from some guy 300 yards away at the, coming towards my subdivision, I want that rifle because it's more powerful and it's longer range and it's more accurate. Absolutely. But 99% of the guys that are buying the more accurate, more powerful rifles, they're doing it so they can hit steel targets at a mile. I was just reading an article of some guys down in Texas just hit a steel target at 2.4 miles with a rifle. That's a powerful rifle. I mean, that rifle has to be powerful. That bullet has to be moving quickly in order to be flat enough and predictable enough to be able to control it, hitting a steel target at 2 miles away. Obviously, these are some of the same technologies and designs that our military uses to protect our assets overseas and where we're deployed in military to deal with targets that are far away so that we don't have to get close, we don't have to be in as much danger. You talk about shooting a deer. You can kill a deer with a moderately powered rifle. You kill a deer with a handgun. But if you want to go up, you want to hunt bear, you want to hunt elk, you want to hunt moose, you're going to be shooting. Where I live in Colorado, you're going to take shots. I've taken shots for almost 500 yards and dropped deer. You need a powerful rifle to do that. Is it overkill for home defense? Absolutely. Does that mean that there isn't some guy that thinks it's a good home defense weapon? Sure. But again, I try to educate around that.
So again, I know you don't speak for the NRA, but we've got over 70% of NRA members that are in favor of federal background checks. Why do you think the NRA is not in favor of it? I'm curious what your opinion on it is, et cetera. I mean, if their members, overwhelming majority of their members say it. I mean, I have a theory, but I'm curious what you think.
My position on the laws that surround gun control and gun safety issues is ultimately we have to come back to the Constitution, right? We have to come back to the U.S. Constitution and the interpretation of the latest interpretations of the Supreme Court. It's an individual right. It says shall not be infringed. Now, I'm not going to come on your show and pound the table and say shall not be infringed because in 2016, we're pretty darn infringed, right? It's not free for all. You can have a gun, do whatever you want with it, right? You've got background checks. You've got, in some states, you've got waiting periods. You've got restrictions on the type of guns. You can't buy a fully automatic gun unless you go through a bunch of extra hoops and pay a tax stamp and all that stuff. There's a lot of infringement. I'm not in favor of infringement. I'm in favor of education. So when you ask me, is there a problem with a background check? I don't have a problem with a background check. I do background checks every time I take delivery of a gun, right? And if I'm getting a gun as a demo from a gun company that wants me to check it out, if I'm buying a gun for my own personal collection or my own use, I go and I do the background check, right? If in some states you don't have to do the background check once you have a concealed carry permit because they say, well, if you have the carry permit, it's valid. You've obviously gone through those hoops, right? The issue of background checks is a political hot button because it's an infringement against the constitutional verbatim interpretation of our right to keep and bear arms. The practical everyday issue of background checks is I don't know a gun owner who hasn't gone through a background check, right? I honestly, in 2016, I don't know that I could find a gun owner that the only guns he has, he's been gifted by family members or he's bought, bought used, legally, private purchase, private transactions. The big hot button issue of the gun show loophole, right? The gun show loophole is a kind of, ghost in the machine kind of idea, right? It's not a thing. The gun show loophole is legal private transfers. In most states, you can legally, privately sell a gun between two parties, as long as that gun's legally owned, and I make a choice as a responsible gun owner about whether or not I'm going to sell a gun to you. Maybe I'm going to ask you if I can take a picture with my iPhone of your ID. I'm going to photocopy your ID. Maybe you have a concealed carry permit. That's going to make me feel better about the transfer. Well, the government said you can carry a gun. I'm going to feel good about selling you a gun. Other guys are going to say, you know what? Constitution, guy seems fine to me. He's going to give me cash. I'm going to give him property. I'm going to sell him a gun. Again, I'm in favor of somebody being a little bit more careful than just meeting a guy in a parking lot and saying, hey, you want to buy a gun? Sure, here, buy a gun. But again, this is an individual right. It's a legal transfer. It's a private transaction that isn't controlled by the government. And when you ask the NRA members, would you want to get rid of private sales? You know, getting rid of private sales would mean if I wanted to give my son-in-law a gun for Christmas, I've got to go to a dealer. I've got to pay a fee. We've got to go through the hoops of the background check. We've got to delay in time. We've got the infrastructure has to be set up. Now the federal government has to pay somebody to stand there and do the background check for that private transfer for me to give my son-in-law a Christmas present. And that seems a little cumbersome and it seems a little ridiculous to a lot of gun owners.
So yeah, there we've got a lot of disagreement. Even if transferring a car from my, if my dad wants to give me a car, well, I got to go through the government because the government's got to know who owns the car.
Well, you don't. So he can sell you the car, and you can put it in the garage. You can put it in the showroom. You can put it in up on blocks in the backyard. If you want to drive it on the street, you've got to register it, right? And if I want to carry that gun, I've got to go through. I've got to get the permit. But the transfer of property isn't controlled by the government. And the other thing about this is keep in mind, as we know, and I get it, like it's real easy to sidestep, but we got to keep coming back to the fact there's no constitutional amendment on cars.
Okay, so I'm going to get to the constitutional amendment right now because, so look, on the car, obviously you buy it to drive it. So, and I don't think there's any harm in asking the government to do a standard check on when you're transferring a car, a gun, etc. I don't think there's any harm in asking to say, hey, I got to make sure you know how to drive, and I'm going to give you a driver's license, and I'm not just going to let you out on the road. And I think there's no harm in saying, hey, I got to know that you know gun safety before I let you own a gun, so I need you to have a gun license, etc. Now, people might say, well, the harm is you're violating the Constitution, okay? Whether that's a sensible idea or not. So let's get to that. It says, of course, Second Amendment, as most people know, says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So there's, of course, tremendous debate over what that means. But I'm curious why strict constructionists who say, no, you've got to read the text of the Constitution and leave it at that, refuse to read the militia part. So again, I'm asking for your opinion here because I genuinely don't know it. Do you think the well-regulated militia part is irrelevant, that the sentence would be the same exact thing if it didn't include that part?
I think it is. I think that it is in many parts of the documents that form our country, there are explanations for why what you're about to read exists, right? The preamble. There are explanations. This thing here establishes why this thing over here is important. Is it unfortunate in 2016 and 1916 and 1966 that we have these debates now for 100 years? We've had to have these debates about why that phrase is there and what it means and how it impacts the clause that follows. The understanding that I have, the belief that I have, is that clause is there as an explanation that because it is incredibly important, especially at the founding of our nation and with the history of our nation, the way our nation was born, that the average person is capable of defending our country, right? That's how we founded our country, was the average person was capable and willing to fight against what we perceived as a tyrannical government to help us establish a more free country, a fairer country. That's the clause that sets up why, as the government, if I'm the government, I shouldn't restrict your access to firearms and your opportunity to be prepared and then to be trained and to be capable, if you're willing, to defend this country should that need to happen. And defend the ideals of the country, even from a tyrannical government, is the ultimate expression of the Second Amendment. And to me, that's really self-evident. It's really obvious. I get how
it's funny how our interpretations are so self-evident to both of us and completely different. Because you look at the history of it, you know what the militias were for. In the North, they were to sometimes guard against the central government, and that's why they put it in the Constitution. In the South, they were largely slave patrols, but again, to, in their view, protect their community, right? but they were well-regulated militia. They were not just random guys with guns, and so I mean, you could put any.
But they were composed of random guys with guns. Now, look, I went to the nation's oldest private military school, the birthplace of ROTC, the birthplace of the idea of the citizen soldier. All right, and that idea of the citizen soldier has been lost to a large percentage of our country, right? Do I think we should have a conscript army? No. Do I think we should force people into a militia? No. Do I think that we should talk about the responsibility that we all have to protect our country and protect our ideals, protect ourselves, protect our communities, protect our families? Yeah, I think we should talk about that more. I think that should be something that people are ready to talk about, willing to talk about, and willing to become educated and prepared to do in a worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario could be flooding. This flooding we've got down in Louisiana going on right now. The power goes out, the police are overburdened, the National Guard is maybe being mobilized, maybe not. But if you can make sure that if you know absolutely for a fact that your 3 neighbors are all there ready to defend themselves, capable of defending themselves, are you more or less worried about someone saying, you know what, the police are really distracted right now, the infrastructure is falling apart, there's no cell phones, there's no electricity, I'll bet I could go over there and take that thing that I want from that guy's backyard. I think I go over there and
again,
we can't
Rob,
say it doesn't happen. It happens.
No, of course it happens. So, but I look at statistics and percentage chances. So in your scenario, I think, yeah, if somebody in that situation goes into my non-flooded attic and takes a couple things I own, boy, that sucks. And maybe if my neighbors are armed, they'll think twice about doing that. That's one side. The other side is I don't want to go back to my house because everybody's on edge and my neighbors all have weapons. And especially if I'm going back there at night, especially if I'm going with my kids, I'm far more likely to get shot. Those are the chances I do not want to take. I think those are as a country, we're taking giant chances that I don't believe we need to take. I mean, the UK has enormous gun control. Well, our rate of gun homicides is 30 times higher than the UK. As a country, we're playing with our lives, literally.
But there's not an absence of violence in the UK.
Right.
I've trained law enforcement. We have a great relationship with a lot of law enforcement communities over there. And the law enforcement over there, some of them are armed, some of them aren't. They've been walking back that we don't need guns thing for a long time. They've been adding more and more armed and well-trained police officers as a percentage basis because violence hasn't gone away just because it's harder to get a handgun.
But deaths are not anywhere near the level that ours are because, yes, you can kill somebody with a knife, but it's harder to kill somebody with a knife and it's harder to kill more people with a knife than it is with a gun. So that's why we have so much more deaths in America and murders than the UK does.
There are plenty of guys I know that train with knives, teach people about using knives.
I know, but there's less of them.
There's less of them, but here's the thing. There was this situation in Japan recently where the nurse that was working in the hospital for the disabled, he obviously lost his mind and decided he was going to put all these people out of their misery with his perception. Yeah. He killed more people with that knife than he would have with a gun. Because if he was using a gun, somebody would have hurt him and stopped him faster. Now, I get it. It's an anomaly.
It's an anomaly,
but
yes.
If the guy is evil, if the guy is deranged, if the guy is intent on killing, he's going to find a way. He's going to drive a truck through your Bastille Day celebration. He's going to build a bomb. He's going to take the knife. He's going to find a way. The guns exist. Is there a danger if we don't educate? Is there a danger if we're not responsible gun owners? Absolutely. Is there a danger if the community with those armed people, if you don't know your neighbors, if you don't shake your neighbor's hand, if you don't talk to your neighbors, if you don't go play bocce ball or volleyball or have community picnics or whatever, that he's going to think you're the bad guy when the electricity does go off and the community is flooded? Yeah. We got to educate around it.
Okay, one more thing about that amendment, because look, so we disagree on what it means in the historical context, and I think well-regulated militia does mean something. I think there's a reason why it's in the sentence. If it said a well-regulated circus, it would mean something. It exists. But okay, I get our disagreement on that, and I think the audience does. I'm curious then what you think is the limit of what the word arms means. Because arms could also mean, it could mean a gun, it could mean a rifle, it could mean automatic, not automatic, it could mean an RPG.
Yeah, nuclear submarine.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's your limit on what the word arms means in that context?
I don't think there is a limit. Now, can we go back and say, well, they couldn't have foreseen the firepower. They couldn't have foreseen the capabilities of the escalation. I don't know if that's true. I mean, these are educated guys, right? Benjamin Franklin was not an idiot. right? Thomas Jefferson was not an idiot. These guys can look and see, well, we used to fight with axes and atlatls and bows, and now we've got these muskets, and we've got cannons, and there are bombs. And these are all arms. They're all kept in the armory, right? The military used them. The militia used them. They knew these things existed. They knew technology existed. They were smart enough to build a government that's lasted for 200 years. I think they were probably smart enough to realize, especially with some of them being scientists and being engineers, that arms would get more capable. You could say more dangerous. I say more capable, because in the hands of the good guy, they're more capable. So again, strict interpretation, there's nothing in there, that phrase, that makes me think I should be restricted from owning a tank if I wanted to, if I could afford it. But I get that should come with education. That comes with responsibility. Is there a reasonable limit? Is there a point where the government steps in and says, wait a minute, you can't have that? That's up to the Supreme Court. And so far, the Supreme Court has said this is an individual right, but they universally, things like background checks, the government, our government, our interpretation, the legislature, the Supreme Court, no one's come in and said background checks are a violation, that it's an unreasonable restriction. It's an unreasonable infringement. Would I say it doesn't look like it follows the Constitution to me? I would say absolutely. Do I resist the government? Do I want to overthrow the government because I have to do a background check? No. Do I buy guns illegally because I'm not going to jump through the hoops that I think violate the Constitution? No. Right? And I think that's where you find 99.9999% of the gun owners in America.
I just want to get clarity on that, because look, on the musket argument, I actually agree with you. So I don't think that it's the Second Amendment's limited to muskets. Okay, I get that they could have foreseen that there would be better technology on weapons. I also think that, as I think that you were alluding to there's limits on every right we have, including the freedom of speech. You can't yell, fire in a crowded theater, etc. So, but you said, if I heard you right, that you could have a tank. So do you think arms like shoulder-fired missiles, do you think that that's constitutional? In the Constitution, we have a right to that?
Strictly, yes. Here's the issue. Shoulder-fired missile. I could build something. I could take one of these little rocket kits, right? These little Estes rocket. I could go to the hobby shop, buy a Estes rocket kit, and I could create buy a metal pipe, buy a PVC pipe, and I could create a shoulder-fired missile out of that rocket kit. Does that mean that the rocket kit should be regulated? Does that mean that PVC pipes should be regulated? Intent is the issue, right? Am I building a weapon of mass destruction in my house? Am I building something that I'm going to shoot at my neighbor's house because his dog's barking? Am I building something that I'm going to use to kill kids in a school? I'm the problem, right? It's not the existence of rocket kits and PVC pipes. It's not the existence of gasoline. It's not the existence of trucks, guns, cars. It's the existence of evil and the intent that we need to be worried about.
Again, there we have total disagreement.
How do you regulate?
I would ban shoulder-fired missiles, tanks,
Okay, but
nuclear weapons so quick. I don't care what your intent is. I'm banning it.
But do you ban? So do you ban the knowledge and the ability for the human to engineer a weapon?
No. Of course, I don't ban knowledge. You can't ban knowledge,
Right.
and I don't want to ban knowledge. So if you want to know how to build a shoulder-fired missile, God bless your heart. If you want to build one, yeah, I get to have reasonable restrictions on everybody's rights. Okay, right to free speech, right to. If you think you have an individual right to bear arms, which I don't agree with, but even granting that, you don't have an individual right to bear nuclear arms.
I understand, but philosophically, if we go down to the baseline, I got to say, if you can trust me with a 357 revolver with 6 rounds in it, which I could kill you with, you could kill me with, right? If we could trust each other with that sitting here, how are we not trusting each other with the nuclear codes and a bomb across town? Philosophically, it's the same
So
idea.
then philosophically, why don't we trust every nation to have nuclear weapons? Then we'll all be safer.
I'll tell you right now, that's not my decision-making process, right? Like I can't. That's not my choice to say, hey, that country over there, we don't trust them. They can't have a gun. I believe that evil exists. If I knew how to get rid of it, I snap my fingers. I'll go teach scuba diving. All right, I'll go become a race car driver. Right? Something else, right? I'll stop teaching people personal offense. But evil exists. If we accept that, then we should be prepared, trained, and equipped if we choose to be so. And I don't think everybody should have a gun. I would never advocate for, you don't want a gun, don't have a gun, right? But you should be prepared to defend your 3-year-old and your 6-year-old somehow, mentally, physically. Just if you just know how to get out of the building. know where to hide in the building, know how to barricade that door if the bad guy is on the other side, because evil exists. If evil exists, and if evil exists on an individual level, evil exists on a community level, it exists on a state level, it exists on a country level, it exists on a global level, be prepared to defend yourself from it. Now, have certain countries proven themselves to be bad actors? Have certain countries proven themselves to be aggressive to their neighbors or a threat to other people? And the community, the global community says, you know what, we want to watch these guys and make sure they don't get too much power because they've shown bad behavior in the past. I get it. What we say, hey, look at that guy over there. He's a violent criminal. He shouldn't own a gun anymore. He's given up his right to own guns because he's done bad things, or he's shown the intent to do bad things, or he's mentally deranged. He's not capable of controlling himself. He's not capable of understanding right from wrong, good from bad, evil from good. So we do restrict on that level. So internationally, do we restrict on that level as well? Absolutely. Is that right or wrong? You know, I'm not in the UN. I don't know.
Okay, I hear you. So super last thing, not about the amendment, but about guns overall, suicides. So if of all the things, you know, this might be the most disturbing to me. I mean, obviously being killed with a gun is quite disturbing. Obviously, I think there's a huge problem of interpretation of the Second Amendment, I believe, et cetera. But and accidents, by the way, there's also 50 people a year every year who get killed by toddlers. That's, you know, instead of the kids getting killed, the kids pick up the gun and kill. But suicides, 9 out of 10 times, if the person who commits suicide does not die, they never go on to try to commit suicide again. So the fact that it's so important for them to fail on that first effort. And with a weapon, with a gun, there's a far, far greater chance of being killed through suicide. I've got numbers on that here and among my notes here, but you know that.
I don't know about the 9 out of 10 people that have one attempt don't go on. It seems like a high number.
Yeah, I was surprised by it too, but that is the number.
How many times am I going to say it, right? Like they could use the knife, they could use the poison, they could suffocate
but
themselves,
the gun
hang
makes
themselves.
it much easier.
The gun is going to be, the argument I always hear is that, well, if the gun's there and somebody impetuously, you know, in a moment of passion, a moment of derangement, a moment of they drank too much, whatever, grabs the gun and puts it to their head and pulls the trigger. That's very different than them grabbing the bottle of pills, opening it up, and drinking all the pills. I don't know that it is. Now, there's a difference between I've got a gun and I'm going to FaceTime my ex-girlfriend and say I'm going to kill myself, and I'm going to take these pills, and right after I take them, I'm going to call my ex-girlfriend and say I just took a bunch of pills. And the opportunity for the ex-girlfriend to call the police or the mom or whoever and send somebody over there to help that person after he took the pills is the same as the opportunity for them to call the person and say, hey, he's got a gun in his hand and I think he's potentially going to kill himself. But once that decision is made, right, I don't think we have to accept that if somebody doesn't make that phone call, if somebody doesn't write the note, if it's not a cry for help, they're going to take the pills, lock the door, turn the TV up, and somebody's going to find him 2 days later.
Yeah.
With the gun, they're going to find him 20 minutes later because you heard it.
Yeah. And so, as usual in our disagreement here, I think the gun is clearly more lethal. You're much more likely to die than even with the pills. How many pills did you take? Whereas, you know, you might miss with the gun. Some people do, but most of the time you put a bullet in your head, you're going to die. And it just increases your chances. That's what I'm worried about. But I wanted to get your perspective, and I did. And I appreciate you taking the time out to come here, Rob. And where can people find out more about what you do?
PersonalDefenseNetwork.com is the best place to go. It's resources for people that are interested, whether with a gun or without, any kind of personal defense, safety, family, home security, any of that kind of stuff. We've got a team of experts, hundreds of free videos and articles at PersonalDefenseNetwork.com. And if you do own a gun, you know, seek out that education, whether it's from my company or any of our affiliated instructors or anybody else. If you have a gun, store it responsibly, get the training, get the education, and let's not be part of these statistics that we have to talk about.
Yeah, and that's the one place where Rob and I definitely agree. If you have a gun, for God's sake, be safe with it. All right, thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.